It didn't slow the story down for me. Like, that's the problem that can happen in my mind.
Right.
When there's too much exposition. Like, he managed to find a balance in this first issue. For me, anyway.
Yeah. For me, the issue I've always had with Thought Balloons, it almost feels kitschy thanks to all that fucking Roy Lichtenstein art that popped up, where it was always the dumbest thought in the Thought Balloons. And for me, they obscure the art, man. If you can tell it in a little panel up in the corner, tell it up in the corner, because then I can look at the art.
We'll have to get back to that about the art and Perez in Crisis, because he sort of circumnavigated what was being done at the time, right, Chris?
Yeah, sure.
It was like,
I'm not sure of your point, but I believe you.
Were you like putting the football down for the place kick with that segue? What was that?
He did. I Charlie Browned it.
Yeah,
it was great.
that was a big swing and a miss there on that
wow.
segue.
Did that make me Lucy? Anyway.
Always. You are always Lucy.
Hey, so this is the first episode of Four Geeks Walk Into a Bar, and we're talking about Crisis on Infinite Earths.
I wouldn't have gotten that from your background.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Or the intro, which says four nerds walking to a bar.
Yeah.
That too.
Yeah.
Nerd, geek, they're synonymous.
To commemorate our walking into a bar, I have myself it's backwards, so I can't read it. A nice fancy bottle of Modelo Especial.
I went
Did you guys?
Whoa!
Did you plan that?
No, not at all.
No. No.
In Dover, the options.
The end of the world.
Exactly.
Nice.
I felt this was fitting.
Yep.
Yeah,
it is fitting.
The options are rare. Are not rare. The options are just small here in Dover for any good beer. This is the home of the Natty Daddy 30 rack. After
the most
all.
interesting man does not go to Dover Foxcroft.
Oh, hell no.
No.
Hell no.
So I had to buy like a random 6-pack that they make, like the build your own. So we'll see how these turn out. But nice. I wanted to use my Chicago Cubs opener here to crack this baby open.
Oh man, that's some classic action.
Oh yeah. I got 1 month of a Chicago Cubs gift subscription box, and that was like one of the items. That was the last month I got it.
This makes noise.
I feel like the Cubs were like an Earth 2 team, you know? And it wasn't until they formed New Earth that, they ended up winning.
Yeah. Well, yeah, considering I would like to, like most Cubs fans will completely ignore from like the 50s on, yes. Which I almost wore my Earth 2, like straight out of Earth 2 shirt tonight, but instead of to pay homage to all the supervillains that appear.
Yeah.
Well, shout out to my local beer vendor, Eric at Bangor Wine and Cheese. I wrote to him. I said, "Hey, I need a suggestion for something to drink on our podcast." I said, "Here's what I'm thinking. I need something that evokes destruction, world ending, and possible rebirth." And he sent me a slew of pictures of different brews, but I felt that La Fin du Monde was definitely the one to start with.
Does it have hints of an oaky rebirth?
Not quite, but it's pretty good. I like it. Belgian style, triple ale.
Fantastic, yeah.
I like
it.
You
got the whole thing?
You got fancy.
Hey, who knows how long we're going to be on here?
You're going to fall off the earth.
Yeah, well, considering this is the first beer I've had since this whole pandemic began, I'm likely to be completely drunk before the end of this.
Fantastic.
So, I mean, I'm a lightweight as it is. So, oh, wow, you're drinking it out of a glass and everything. Fancy.
Well, that bottle's pretty big.
Do you have a fine charcuterie in front of you, or?
I left that on Earth 3. Speaking of,
wow,
villainous. I know, I'm trying to go with that,
super smooth
segue there.
Yeah, your segues are on. Your segues have improved.
Speaking of improvement, no. So we should introduce ourselves for anybody that is, coming into this and watching us and has no idea who we are, and you probably don't care. But my name is Gibran, Gibran Graham, and I've been reading comics since I was very little. I think one of my very first comic books was, I think, Spider-Woman 3, bought off a newsstand in the mean streets of Boston. And it was pretty much over after that. I just kept reading comics. And my connection with Crisis is that I had certainly read a lot of DC heroes when I was really little. I especially liked some of the Superman titles and Superboy and Supergirl. And I think I really had this affinity for Superboy because, he was this young version of Superman, not unlike me being young. And, he had all the powers, right? And also all the, young kid, teenage hijinks that sort of went along with that as well. And also some pretty far out stories. This was back in I think the New Adventures of Superboy days. So I was familiar with a lot of the, mainstream DC superheroes, especially after watching Super Friends. And I was aware of Crisis coming out, but I did not pick it up. My first issue was number 7, an infamous issue, which we'll get to a few episodes from now. But that was the very first issue that I picked up right off the newsstand. And I was sort of devastated by it and thought it was the most amazing thing I ever read. And it was really happy it took me about a year and a half, but finally ended up getting all the issues and reading through and just really loved it.
Nice. Now, I'll go next since I made the mistake of speaking. My name is Dan Fleming. I have been reading comic books on and off since I was probably 8 or so. One of the first comics I remember getting. My mother, when I had my tonsils out, got me one of the issues of the adaptation of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which I just thought was super badass. I would get comics often when I was sick. Another one I remember getting is Rom Space Knight with the dire wraiths on the cover. It took place in like the sewers. It was creepy as hell. And after that, I kind of moved on to the wonderful Marvel New Universe. And what else? Oh, the NAM. I was big on the NAM. And the very first comic I ever subscribed to was G.I. Joe, beginning with issue 10. I don't think I subscribed until around issue 22, because it was a big pain in the ass to go to Reuben's Farmer's Market on my bike and pick up the monthly issue because I didn't pay attention to when they actually came out. Remember, I actually had to get the NAM issue 2 from Mr. Paperback in the Bangor Mall because Reuben's Farmer's Market never got it. So that was when I first learned that you could get comics actually somewhere other than my hometown. I didn't realize that they were everywhere. I stopped reading comics when I was a teenager for the longest time. And I actually didn't pick up a comic again until Gibran convinced me that I needed to pick up Daredevil issue number 1 because it was written by one of my favorite filmmakers at the time, Kevin Smith. And since then, I've pretty much gone into bankruptcy buying comic books. So thanks.
I'm totally to blame.
You are. As with almost
welcome.
everything, Lucy, you are to blame for this.
That's true.
So my name's Chris Beckett. I'm from Calais, Maine, which is way down east. And we had Mr. Paperbacks, which is where I got my comics. I didn't start till I was 12 in '84 with G.I. Joe 23. My parents were teachers. They weren't big into comics. They wanted real books in front of me. But once I started, it was a quick downhill spiral into a mass of different titles. The Flash was one of the first ones I got after that. He was my favorite hero from watching Super Friends. And he was the reason that I eventually picked up Crisis probably a year after it was published. I was poring over the Mile High Comics catalog and came across a notation by Crisis 8 that said the Flash died, and I had no idea.
Spoilers.
I had to have that, yeah, for a 36-year-old
Edit that
comic.
out.
And so I picked that up and picked the rest of them up and read them and devoured them and loved them. And I have been collecting with very few gaps since then and have 19 long boxes and multiple collections and piles in other places. So that's my story.
So my name is Ben Roberts. My comic life is different than the other three. I was pretty randomly connected to comic books in my single digit ages. I remember certainly not on a non-monthly basis grabbing a comic every once in a while, but most of my introduction to major characters, Spider-Man, His Amazing Friends, Saturday morning cartoons, other Spider-Man type TV shows, really kind of started to get more and more. I used to just buy comics from a quarter box from a local used bookstore. Sort of got more serious when I got my first job and I actually had some money to go to a comic shop or to buy comics on a regular basis. So, but from the time I was probably 15 until 19 or so, I was a regular Wednesday after school, New Comic Book Day visitor to the comic shops. After that, randomly, you know, I would pick up a trade paperback if it was a storyline I wanted to read. But the bulk of my comics are from that period, 15 to 19. So 91 through 95, unfortunately, in some cases. But I got a lot of good back issues there as well. First time I ever read Crisis full through actually was the trade release in late 90s, I guess, 2000, in that ballpark.
Same.
Yeah. And this is, of course, I knew about Crisis. You had to know about Crisis. Worlds lived, worlds died, everything changes.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing that it was so long before they actually collected it as a trade paperback. I mean, they put a hardcover release out in '98 and then followed it up with the soft cover.
I think editorially, they were unsure if Crisis would make sense or was worth collecting. They were worried because everything was new and changed, that it would be confusing for people to read. I think that's part of why they didn't. I read that in one of the interviews. I'd have to find that.
That makes sense. And also it ties in really well to our whole reason for doing this. The four of us have been through the pandemic meeting regularly on a weekly basis, each of us choosing a different run of older DC comics that we either had lost touch with or wanted to, read for the first time because we always wanted to. And we've been, reading runs of these comics for the last several months and, discussing them and having fun, right? Mostly through the DC Universe app. So here we are, we're here to talk about Crisis. We've got sort of a format that we've kind of, talked about, going along with like looking at the cover, getting a synopsis of the issue of Crisis that we're talking about that week, what we liked, what we didn't like, who are some of these characters? Why are they in this series? Some of the back matter, there's some really interesting stuff about why Crisis existed in the first place and how it came about. And then, is it doing what it intended to do? How many people lived? How many people died? And then there's a bajillion of crossovers that happened too. And this was really one of the first, company superhero mega epics that had crossovers that either DC or Marvel ever released. Just predating this was Marvel's Secret Wars, which didn't so much have crossover issues as it had an issue of each of the main heroes comics that sort of led into that 12-issue series and then led out of it the following month. This was a much differently orchestrated event, as we'll talk about quite a bit. So we'll talk about our ratings for some of those crossover issues. Were they important? Do they make you want to read those books afterwards? Lots to discuss, but I think ultimately we'll have some fun. So I think our first thing to do is kind of talk about the cover. Crisis #1. I mean, that's the first issue. And if you had seen this on the newsstand, on the spinner rack, would you have picked it up?
Based on the cover? Yeah. Based on the cover, hell yeah, I would pick that up.
So your point of the rarity of crossovers, everybody's there.
Mm-hmm. Even if I don't, especially at the time, I wouldn't have recognized nearly anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I would have recognized the Green Lantern costume. I would not have recognized Jon Stewart, and I would have recognized the Superman outfit, and then like would have been, why the hell is Superman old? But the thing that would have drawn completely into this book is right over your, it's right beside you, that drawing of Pariah.
Hmm.
That right there, Perez nails facial expression. Yes, there you go. Perez nails facial expressions on that cover. You've got the anguish of Pariah. You've got, you can't see it because you're covering him up, but you've got Firestorm just looking like he has no idea what the hell is going on. You've got Blue Beetle like looking like he was running and kind of stubbed his toe.
Well, and that stage, who's Blue Beetle?
Yeah. But even amongst all
idea.
that, then you have this character up in what would be top left for the screen here, with their head completely obscuring my point. But you've got Harbinger, who I had no idea who she was, looking just completely passive. Like everyone else on that cover is freaking the hell out, and she's just kind of there. Mm-hmm. So that would have intrigued me.
Yeah, I think, Perez really played to the composition of that cover as a full double page spread quite a bit, with Pariah in the one corner and Harbinger in the other corner. And like you're saying, I mean, the emotions, the range of emotions on everybody in this is just, all over the place. Chris, what did you think about the cover?
Perez, he's my favorite superhero artist. And this would have been my introduction to Perez. And I fell in love with his art immediately. I know I did. And I don't know if there's any artist better at designing a page or a large image with multiple characters. And they're just all in motion, and it's dynamic. Like, it's just, yeah.
That's why he doesn't have a Twitter account. He doesn't get out of bed for less than 280 characters.
Exactly.
Nice.
You've been saving that joke, haven't you? You've been holding on to that one.
As a kid, I always loved some of those like infinity type covers of different things. There's that Time magazine cover with Mickey Mouse on it, which just keeps going. And that is one of the elements of this cover that really intrigued me, was all the Earths, just all these multiple Earths, the Earths inside the logo. I mean, aside from the characters themselves, I mean, that sort of dynamism just sort of really attracted me. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? That front Earth is like being destroyed, and the title itself, it just really kind of draws me in. I mean, like, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Okay. There's so many questions about that. If you don't know anything about this, if you're not familiar with the fact that there are multiple universes and multiple Earths in the DC universe at that time, or the multiverse, then, I mean, this is completely brand new, and I think a little mind-boggling.
I'm glad you brought up the logo too, because I know, wasn't it Todd Klein that had a hand in it, but it wasn't him who did the final creation? I
thought he did the final, but he definitely went through a few different iterations of it. I was glad he ended up with this one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. It's solid. It's bold. Has all the tiny little Earths in between. Yeah. It sticks out on the rack. It does.
Yeah.
That top will be noticeable above the,
right,
above the comic in front of it.
Going to get your attention, I think, no matter what type of person. Also, clearly this had been marketed leading up to it. Marv Wolfman, not a small name in 1985. Neither was Perez. By then they were arguably at the top of their game. And Perez about actually to take off with, I don't know when soon after. But you've been reading for a while. You were familiar with Crises. crises, from multiple connections of the Justice League and Justice Society over time. If you were younger, you had a reaction like we did. What's going on? This looks like a big deal. So I think right from the get-go, it does a good job of telling everybody who's walking into the Mr. Bareback or the drugstore or whatever.
Definitely. I mean, and like Dan said,
this is going to be something everybody's going to want to read.
It's got all these different characters on it. I mean, even if you don't know who some of them are, that's one of the reasons why team books sold so well, especially in the 80s, because you weren't just getting one superhero like Spider-Man, you were getting multiple heroes, whether you were reading JLA or Avengers or the X-Men or the Teen Titans, I mean, you were getting more bang for your buck because you were getting multiple heroes. And so here you've got like a ton of them scattered all over the cover. Some of them not even heroes, some of them villains, right? So if you didn't know who they are, you're in for like just a real treat because you're going to find out. Which kind of takes us over to our synopsis part. So Chris is going to do the synopsis of the first issue on this episode. And this is good for, if you've never read Crisis, you've no idea. This will help you follow along if you just want to, kind of, watch and laugh at us being geeks about all this stuff, and don't know, you've never read the comic yourself.
I'd recommend reading this. Like I said,
I do
download,
too.
Like click on the episode, pause it, and go read the book, then come back. Or maybe just click, leave, come back, click again, read an issue, click, leave. A lot of clicks.
Just shut this off and go read the comic and never come back. I mean, whatever. Just
no, that's a terrible
read the comic.
Yeah, edit that out. We're never
that's a terrible choice, man.
Never get that monetized.
All right then. Crisis, Chapter 1, The Summoning. We open with the birth of the multiverse. What should have been a single universe with a single Earth became many, and now that debt is being paid as a wall of antimatter sweeps across dimensions. As we watch one Earth die, and followed by the death of Earth 3, which is home to the crime syndicate, which includes evil doppelgangers of heroes we're familiar with, like Ultraman and Superwoman, and the lone hero who stands against them, Alexander Luthor. As the wall of antimatter destroys Earth 3, Luthor and his wife, Lois Lane Luthor, secure their child in a vibrational rocket and send it across parallel dimensions to Earth 1, so that he might at least be saved, not unlike the way a baby Kal-El was launched from Krypton to become Earth's Superman, the very first superhero. And with every universe's death, a mysterious green-cloaked figure named Pariah is forced to bear witness, unable to intervene, but we'll learn more of him later. Back on Earth 1, the satellite of the Monitor, his assistant Lila energizes to become Harbinger. Dividing into identical clones, she journeys to multiple Earths at multiple points in time to retrieve heroes and villains the Monitor needs to defend the multiverse, including Dawnstar of the Legion of Superheroes from the 30th century and Arion of Atlantis 45,000 years in the past. Once her task is complete, Harbinger returns to the Monitor's satellite and powers down. The collection of super beings stand in awe of the structure, unsure who it is that summoned them, and uncertain even of who many of the other heroes and villains might be. There's a Superman, but he's older and from Earth 2, and a Green Lantern, but he's new to the ring and African American. Before they find any answers, though, the Shadows attack, a horde of shadow demons which seem impervious to physical contact, even at the strength levels of Superman. It's an impossible task, and the collective of super beings appears on the brink of defeat when a blinding light fills the satellite and the shadows flee. At which point, the Monitor reveals himself, telling the heroes and villains that he is the one who summoned them because their universes are about to die.
Well encapsulated, sir.
Yeah.
So right away, like if you were not familiar with these Earth 3 characters, you open, you've got Earth 3, you've got the crime syndicate. These are evil versions of our favorite Justice League heroes, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc., and a good version of Lex Luthor, right? And all of a sudden it's gone. It's destroyed. Like the whole thing.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I love how they visualize it. It's just this white wall of nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You start to get that like blue pencil outline, and then you're done. Yeah. I like the fact that the first like people they actually kill are the crime syndicate. I knew nothing of them, but I mean, I like villains. I like villains, and the thought of an Earth ruled by the villains was really a cool idea for me. I mean, then got destroyed immediately upon me going, "Wow, that's a really cool idea." Shit, they're all dead. But thanks to Grant Morrison for eventually bringing them back. But it was really intriguing, and it kind of showed you the power level that you were dealing with. This wasn't, Captain Cold getting wiped out. Yeah. This was people the level of Superman.
Right.
They couldn't fight this. So if that Superman has trouble, dies, what's going to happen to our Superman?
If you didn't know the characters, then they may not be anybody you cared about. But if you were long time DC reader, then you may have read, some of their earlier appearances, which really had been, for the most part, much, much earlier. But a lot of times they had just sort of gotten relegated to being trapped in this limbo dimension that the Justice League and Justice Society had put them in. And you didn't get such great story even about them, like even in just like 5 or 6 pages that you get here. I mean, there's so much character in all of these characters, probably more character imbued in them than probably all of their previous appearances. But I think that's part of Wolfman's writing magic, is that he really encapsulated who all these characters were, along with Perez just really getting their look, their how they move, the right sort of actions for all of them, and together they just create these characters that they just come to life on the page, even if you had no connection to them whatsoever. So you see them and you're like, damn, this white wall of nothing is just taking them and just systematically killing the entire world. And each of these villains and the hero Luthor and his wife. And like Chris said, you've got this sort of, story that resembles what we all know of Superman's origin, where the dying planet of Krypton gets, destroyed, and little baby Kal-El gets rushed to Earth, and that's sort of the same thing happening here, but the opposite. Really kind of interesting, and it was also interesting to me that the character of Alexander Luthor, the hero of this world, really only had one other appearance before this, a few years before that, in the DC Comics Presents annual that featured the Golden Age and Silver Age Superman, both Earth 1 and Earth 2, and then Ultraman from Crime Syndicate. And Marvel created the Alexander Luthor's character in that story. And then a couple years later, he brings him back for this. Who knows? If this had never happened, maybe we never would have saw that character again. Of course, we don't really see him again after this, but
we wouldn't have had Infinite Crisis, though.
True.
So obviously, Gibran, you brought up the crossover aspect of this. Dozens and dozens of crossovers throughout the course of the 12-issue Nexus series. However, you could read this issue and still get an idea for the scope. It was very, very clear this is going to impact more than just the Justice Society and Justice League. This is the infinite breadth of a story, which is pretty hard to do in 22, 23 pages, whatever it ends up doing.
Oh, he got 32 for this one, didn't he?
Right. No ads.
Yeah, they bulked this one up.
Well, maybe they saw the cameras.
I can't imagine trying to combine this into like a 24-page book. This would have been madness.
But you're right. It's definitely a good intro, and definitely is not dependent on we talked about the introductions of the characters in a thought balloon style that Wolfman writes, and he does a really good job, I think, of kind of introducing you to who all these characters are. Yeah, and again, you might not have ever seen them before. Maybe you've never even heard of the Legion of Superheroes, and this Dawn Star character is just really well written. You got a kind of an idea of who she is, what she does. You don't know all the ins and outs of her, but she's got a particular voice. She's got a particular look about her, certain motivations, and he does that with all of these heroes or villains that he introduces as part of this core group that Harbinger goes out and brings back. Right. I think, I look at the characters and I don't think I was familiar with a single one of them except for maybe Firestorm, having seen him in Super Friends. But you get a full understanding, I think, of these individual characters without any idea of why they were brought together or why these particular heroes and villains are brought together.
And most of their introductions are a page or two at most.
Yeah, they're not skimping.
Yeah. It's like they've got a story to get to, and she's popping in and out of all these worlds, grabbing them and going.
Right.
They don't even, you don't even get much more of them until they're all on the satellite.
Yeah. But the danger is so obviously present too, because you open the book and you lose 2 Earths, and then there's another Earth or universe that's killed off camera, because by the time Harbinger comes back, what is it that the monitor says, Chris?
He's lost another Earth and 5 heroes. So
I want to know who those 5. I want to know who
Right.
those 5 heroes were.
I know.
Yeah. What Earth was that? I know.
You'll never know.
That would be a good question. You ever meet Marv Wolfman at a convention? That's the question to ask him.
Yeah.
What Earth died? Who were those heroes that he didn't get? But he obviously replaced them with some of the heroes that are on the monitor satellite when Harbinger gets back. What else do we like or not like about this issue? Was there anything that you didn't like?
Let me get to my matter/antimatter notes here. One of the things I actually didn't really care for, other than Dawnstar, was I didn't really like how he wrote a couple of the female characters. With Killer Frost being the notable one. I get that you've got to show off Psycho Pirate's powers, but just to turn her into a fawning fangirl for Firestorm was a bit much for me. I mean, comics are so dominated by male characters as it is, and there aren't many female characters to begin with in this book. Why do you need to make one of the main ones just
Yeah.
I'm only guessing, probably for the comedy aspect that it allows Ronnie Raymond to do. Even
to me, it would have been funnier the other way around.
Oh yeah, I'm not denying that. I'm saying I can bet he was thinking this will be funny. Ronnie Raymond won't want it, but he will. Like there's one point that she's not bad looking. I mean, you're supposed to get a laugh from that.
Yeah. It's not great.
No.
Yeah. But other than that, there wasn't much to not like.
I mean, obviously we built up this.
It was a solid book.
Kind of a cliffhanger ending, right? Like it leads you into, well, what the heck is the monitor going to talk about?
Well, supposedly his first actual visual in any of the books that he had even appeared in prior.
Yeah, first of all, right?
Yeah, because he was always in shadow.
Speaking of the monitor, for a character who only had a handful of appearances leading up to this, definitely, I'm going to put this, keeping him secret, obviously, so he leads in the beginning, he has some power, but obviously Harbinger and he on the same power scale, working together, a little bit of conflict. It's a great intro to a character, given the whole rest of the context that he's going to be somebody who's driving the boat, so to speak. An evolution.
And he looks unlike pretty much anybody that even to this day, unlike anybody else in the DC universe at that time, right?
He's got those sweet cornrows, man. He was ahead of the time.
Definitely. But I mean, he doesn't seem like he's from any race that I think, we can say we've seen at that point. He definitely is very distinct and different. So he's got a lot of mysteriousness around him. And, I think that's, he seems to know everything that we don't.
Oh, he's been watching for a long time.
Right.
He's got tapes. We'll see some of them later.
Villains and heroes throughout all of Earths.
I think we should quickly go through who some of these characters are that Harbinger brings out. We've talked about a couple of them. There's Solivar.
King Solivar, Gorilla City.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you know that their mental acuity is because they use 100% of their brain power? That's why they're so advanced.
A lot of sense.
Does make sense.
That's even a
smart choice not taking Grodd.
Right.
He was a little busy, tied up.
I don't think he would have played well with others anyway.
But,
and he was so Solivar was always pretty much a Flash character, right? That's where he comes from.
They're Flash character. Flash is the only one who can see the Gorilla City. He's the only one that really interacts with them.
So you got King Solivar, who was a Flash supporting character. You've got Dawnstar from Legion of Superheroes in the 30th century. You've got Firebrand from 1942, member of the All-Star Squadron. Then you've got Blue Beetle, who most people had not seen at all at that point because he wasn't a DC character until a year or so before this, when DC bought all the Charlton superhero characters. Then you've got Psycho Pirate, which I think to that point had only been a Earth 2 villain, maybe in All-Star Squadron Justice Society issues.
That sounds right. And this is the second Psycho Pirate too.
Right. Arion, Lord of Atlantis, who started off as a supporting character and backup in Warlord and then got his own series.
Yeah, it was just a backup. It wasn't actually connected to Warlord, but yeah.
No. Firestorm, he was probably one of the bigger, more popular characters at the time. Along with Killer Frost. And then the other characters that are in the Monitor satellite, which are the John Stewart Green Lantern, which at that point, if you're following Green Lantern, you know that he's taken on the mantle and has the ring. You've got Geoforce from the Outsiders and Cyborg from the Teen Titans, both which were very popular team books at the time. You got Dr. Polaris, who, I don't know, Green Lantern villain?
He's a Green Lantern villain. He's from Green Lantern number 12.
Oh,
I didn't know he was he's old school Green Lantern villain.
That is old.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Simon, who was a New Teen Titans villain, and you've got the Earth 2 Superman and Obsidian, who's from Infinity Inc., which I don't know how popular that series was at the time, but it was a team book as well, and those are Earth 2 heroes. So a lot of characters.
Like
and they're all fighting together,
They're not ones that you readily knew.
Right.
Especially, I didn't know any of them. I recognized Superman. I probably recognized the Green Lantern outfit. Right. That was it. I didn't know any of them when I read this the first time. Oh, well, yeah, I'm not sure if I even knew Firestorm.
Yeah.
Like I don't remember watching that season of Super Friends.
I think definitely out of all the characters that are kind of introduced in this, Blue Beetle is one of the ones that just, I think, really leaves a lasting impression. Just because he's got that sort of slapstick, Spider-Man-esque kind of joviality as he bounds around, you know.
And he's got he's got like a gadget, you know.
Right?
He's got the Beetle ship or whatever the hell it's called.
He does seem to have some answers.
Yeah.
Whether it's from him, I don't know if he's trying to be flippant about the situation, but he definitely gets like some forward momentum. He wants to make sure that he's on to the next step.
And what I don't remember. Does it mention what Earth she goes and gets him at? Does it say?
It doesn't.
No,
it does not.
Name it.
So we don't even know this, but all of these heroes and villains are all from Earth 1 or Earth 2, regardless of the, you know, future or past. But he's the only one that's from a different Earth.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't know this at the time, but looking back on it, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. For me, getting back to Dan mentioned the matter antimatter, which is our nomenclature for what was good and what was bad.
Yeah.
Matter for me overall is the Perez artwork, but specifically that instance with Blue Beetle, he makes him so like Blue Beetle is basically a Batman doppelganger, but that body language, like specifically when he does that modified somersault and kicks the guy in the face, like that doesn't look like Batman.
No,
like it looks, that makes him a really distinct character for me. That always stood out for me.
Well, just Perez's page compositions in general. I mean, I was sold on the first double page spread 2 and 3, where it's got like 6 panels of Pariah's face, like zooming in and getting more distraught. And then the big Michael Bay, you know, street, everyone in the street fleeing for their lives action scene. You know, people jumping over taxis and whatnot. And then there were 6 other panels below that, which kind of mirrored the Pariah panels. And it was just masterwork of what you can do with a comic page as far as your layouts go.
Yeah.
This was not, you know, 4 panel pages. This was all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, if this happened to be your first, you know, instance of seeing Perez's artwork, it is an amazing, you know, issue for that. I mean, you're right. The composition of all the panels and the pages, I think everything else he had done to that point, and he played with a lot of this composition stuff and some of the JLA and New Teen Titans, but really he outdoes himself and just even in this issue alone. And so many like just details that there's that shot when Harbinger collects Blue Beetle and like just the reflection of her in his yellow goggles.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if anybody else would have bothered with that. It's not important to the story. It's just a little minute detail that is just really kind of his signature of just adding things in because it looks great and makes sense. You know, I don't think he ever does anything that doesn't have any kind of like basis in reality. You know, I mean, reality being the comic book world, but like he doesn't put a reflection in something that wouldn't have a reflection for no reason, right? They're goggles and he's staring at her and he's supposed to be surprised and we're seeing through his eyes what his reaction is and why, just in that one little panel. And that's the kind of thing he does throughout all this. The whole thing, the sequence with Psycho Pirate's Medusa mask, you know, and how it floats by Harbinger onto Psycho Pirate's face. I mean, just so many things like that just are details that he puts in that just really sort of make the flow of the issue and keep it exciting to look at and read.
Yeah.
And he draws the hell out of the Monitor's satellite.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
That establishing shot when they were first in the satellite, gorgeous.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows the. I mean, I am not an artist, but I can't imagine the perspective of drawing a big shot that takes place in an orb is easy. You don't have straight perspective lines, and he's got. I should have it out. For those interested, I am reading the hardcover that came within the box set, which, yeah, I feel spoiled just reading this. It's so nice.
Back I bought 20 years ago.
Yeah, but just everyone's at varying levels in this place. You know, Green Lantern's off in one side scanning something with his ring. Superman and Obsidian are hanging out at the bottom. Cyborg is hanging out with Geoforce, which is kind of cool because it's the one person he'd know that's there. You know, you know, you've got characters flying around. You've got villains off in like Simon's off in like the rafters almost, just seeing what's going on.
Staying away from people.
Yeah, staying away from people. King Solivar is using his feet hands to, you know, grip onto a rail. He's not even standing like, you know, like the humans do. You've got Killer Frost and Firestorm up in the corner with her like leaning onto him, you know, because she now needs a savior or something. But it's a hell of an establishing shot for when you've got all your characters pretty much together for the first time. It's a lot to look at, take in.
And you're right, the perspective is amazing. Another artist, you know, not as talented as Perez would have, you know, that image would have been flat. You know, you wouldn't have the depth that you have with the way that he drew that.
I don't even know if they would have tried it.
Yeah. Right.
A lesser artist, this would have been a series of different, you know, medium shots.
Yep.
On the people that are all standing around.
And he continues that too, though. I mean, he takes that large, you know, double page panel there, and like, you know, in the next page, when all of the shadow creatures attack, you know, you still get that sort of like, this is a fishbowl kind of, you know, element to it, which is kind of neat. And again, you've got, he's already established where they are. It's this expansive, huge satellite room. And then even when he goes into the battle with smaller panels, you get the feeling that every time you go to a different panel, you were in a different area of that room, which he's already established. I mean, maybe we're making a big deal out of something that was just completely accidental, but I just, you know, he just does it so well.
It's just something he drew up over breakfast, you know? Yes.
Right. That was one of the interesting things that I had read about too, in one of the, you know, earlier interviews that came out at the time that Crisis was coming out, was that the way that he drew the issue was he would really just do rough sketches of where the characters were going to be, and then wanted Wolfman to, you know, script it and put in the you know, get the letterer to put in all the captions and stuff, so that he could then know exactly what kind of room he had to play with to put all the details and all of the other stuff in there. That's pretty cool too, because I think, you know, up until that point, a lot of them, you know, these superhero books were done not that way. You know, you just sort of, especially in the Marvel method, you would draw that, you know, that plot out, you know, and then the writer would go in and just get all the captions put all over the artwork, you know, wherever they could fit it. And this was definitely a little different than that. And I think that really, you know, upholds his level of and quality of art to be able to really kind of understand exactly what he can do. And he's got that relationship with Marvel, and then having done other work with him like Teen Titans, that they can play off each other's strengths as well.
I don't think I've ever read an instance of the lettering being the first thing that was complete in a book ever. I mean, it's so opposite of like the Marvel style where it's the last thing done. I mean, DC full script style, you're still going off a script and you know what's going to be written there, but you still you do your art first and then it goes off to the letterer. This was, he knew how to make the most use of what he needed, of what he was going to have. I mean, because how often do we see in comic books where it's confusing to read because the letterer had to move a panel or a balloon to a weird place because they didn't want to cover up effective art, but then it makes the page ineffective because you don't know where to go when your eyes are reading it. So, I mean, very forward thinking on Perez's part to do that, to know that that's what would work best for the story.
So speaking of the story, Chris, I know you had done a lot of research about looking at why and how this all came about, you know, in sort of in real life, you know, why Marv Wolfman even proposed to do Crisis on Infinite Earths, and the fact that it's tying into DC's 50th anniversary and that there were all these Earths. I mean, tell us more about some of the stuff that you found out about.
Well, yeah, there was a letter, Green Lantern 143, I think it was, which Wolfman was editing or writing or both, and about a continuity error that they found in a previous storyline. And he said something to the effect that at some point editorial will get around to streamlining and fixing all the issues with the fact that you had these multiple Earths, multiple dimensions, multiple Supermans, multiple Wonder Womans, and just with all these different writers, artists, teams working, doing their own monthly stories, you're going to get continuity errors that are going to pop up. And so he started thinking about that, took this monitor who, when he was a kid, he created him as the librarian, as a nemesis for the Justice League and Justice Society, and started thinking that maybe they could streamline the universe with a giant story. Originally, they're going to call it History of the DC Universe. It eventually became Crisis on Infinite Earths. They hired, was it Peter Sanderson?
Yeah.
To do research for this project, which involved him reading every single DC comic up to
Best
that point.
job ever.
Yeah.
He thought it would only take him
Dream
6
job.
months.
Yeah.
It took him 18 months. So the fact that it took longer meant it got pushed ahead, and then they realized that they were coming up on the 50th anniversary and decided to do it for that.
So keep in mind though, like, I don't think I could have read all those comics even in 18 months. And not only did he read the comics, but he was taking notes of
Right. Good
continuity, where characters were, all that kind of stuff. Like that's amazing.
Well, not only that, he wasn't reading these off an app or a bunch of collected editions.
Going to find floppy.
I have this guy. Yeah, I have a picture that he's in like this back room, looking like somewhere where like Fox Mulder sticks the lone gunman when they need to look up something. It's just like walls of bankers' boxes full of old back issues, type of thing.
Sounds heavenly.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of does, but man, that is an undertaking.
The whole point was to basically get all the streamline into one universe, obviously, one Earth, one history, but also they felt that a lot of their characters had become diluted. For example, Superman, they felt he was no longer unique, let alone distinct, because there wasn't just Superman of Earth 1, there was Superman of Earth 2, there was Supergirl, and isn't there like a super chimp? And there's like a super horse.
Beppo the super monkey, right?
Right. Beppo the super monkey. And So they wanted to have one Superman. They wanted to have one Wonder Woman. They had the Green Lantern Corps. I don't know what if they were thinking of. Obviously, they weren't thinking of having one Green Lantern, but that was the whole purpose. Which, for Roy Thomas, who was the guardian of the Golden Age characters, was not a good thing, because that meant all, like, the original Hawkman, the Atom, all of these superheroes and villains, some had original doppelgangers. See Ben's picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was not
And
going to
so
be
those
good.
characters were on Earth 2, what we know of as Earth 2,
It's obviously
as opposed as Earth 1,
the
which
first
the
ones
reason
were on Earth
for
too.
right, the earlier editions were on Earth 2, but the reason why they were named that way was not because one was better than the other, but because it was just the first one that was named.
Yeah,
It was the quickest
One
editorial
named the other.
solution.
Yeah. So they wanted to streamline. They wanted to make it more accessible. They wanted to make it not confusing. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, I don't know at my young age if I really had any questions about where any of these characters were taking place within each other. I mean, I suppose being the continuity guy that I feel like I am nowadays, I probably would have grown into, really checking all of it and being like, this doesn't make sense. I would have written that letter to the editor in Green Lantern 143. But, it seems to be that as more singular as a lot of the DC stories were, like you could just pick up an issue and you usually had like a story in an issue and that was it, as opposed to a lot of the Marvel comics we had an ongoing continuity, which I guess the flip side of that is that people sometimes felt that they couldn't get into certain Marvel comics because there was just such years of history going into it. Like I've heard a lot from people that they don't know where to start with X-Men because, it just seems to be going on and on. It's one long story, whether that's true or not. But here it was more of, well, I don't know if I'm reading about the Superman who married Lois Lane or the Superman that has Supergirl as a relative. I mean, I guess that does get confusing after a while.
Oh, I'm pretty sure the only person who probably understood it all was Roy Thomas.
But that was his job, right? So he
Yeah.
was the writer and editor at the time of All-Star Squadron and also Infinity Incorporated. And interestingly enough, a lot of DC's structure at the time involved being a writer and editor of some of your books. And he was, like Chris said, he was charged with being the Golden Age or Earth 2, captain. He was in charge of whatever happened with those characters. Anything that happened had to sort of like get checked with him. Is like, can this happen? Can we use this character? Can we do that? But because those characters are the ones that are likely the doppelgangers that are going to bite it in the end, or need to be cleaned up, it does affect him the most.
Yeah, his in the companion book that comes with the hardcover set, the Behind the Crisis. I love the memos that go back and forth. Yes, there it is. I love the memos that go back and forth between him and the other participants in this, because they are some of the most majestically passive-aggressive things I've ever read in my life. Where you can, I mean, he'll flat out say, I mean, he goes straight out aggressive in some of the instances where he's like, I am not behind this. I think it's a terrible idea, but he's a team player, so he's on board. I think he also probably saw that this would be a way that he could still have his finger in the pie, was by being so helpful. They would probably be like, oh, I guess we'll only kill these characters you're using. Because, yeah, I mean, there were times in those letters where he was just like, I don't know what you're trying to do with this. Bad idea. And I can understand why, because as you said, it's his. I'm only really familiar with him from our time reading All-Star comics and stuff a while back. Um, the guy knows how to fill blanks in like nobody's business. Like, if you're like, I need to know what happened between this panel in 1963, he'll fucking know. And will then write an overly expositive story about what happened in those two, that panel break. But he built his career at DC in mining that material for all that it was worth. And whether or not you like his writing style, which I'm not a fan of, you've got to give it to the guy for being able to he was able to come up with stories, and a lot of them, using having access to very small resources.
Right. It's interesting. Like, I wasn't sure how to take those memos that he written at first. I was seeing the passive aggressive in it as well, but I also was recognizing that he was trying to do what he could, because he knew the writing was on the wall, right? He knew that, this was going to happen whether he liked it or not. So how could he make the best of it? And as we're reading through Crisis now, I'm starting to see some of the things that he mentioned in the books. And it's kind of interesting. It was like, okay, Marv really took, any input to heart. He really incorporated some of this stuff, which is, I think, really interesting. And it's too bad that there weren't more writers and editors that, took part right away, because it probably could have, it might have changed things for the better or for the worse, but it might have integrated some more things in the DC universe, which I think we'll talk about when we're talking about crossovers a little bit.
Well, I don't think it's any mistake that, or any coincidence that of what was it, like eight books that we had as tie-ins for this issue, 4 of them were written by Roy Thomas.
Right. It's true.
He was definitely the curator of the continuity for Earth 2, which was, you do have to give the guy some credit, because he is sort of living between the margins of that golden age continuity, but he still was tasked with writing new stories.
Well, he made a continuity out of books that were not written with a continuity in mind.
Yeah.
That's, when one character changes their costume from issue to issue.
Yeah.
It's not a story
make a doppelganger.
I would not want to have to write as why they changed their costume or their powers changed between issues. But, back then it was months before a character would be in one book and then the next, and a different writer maybe, and who knows why their powers were changed, but he had to come up with that.
Yeah.
And I know if I had been doing that and that had been my career, I wouldn't be all that in on an idea that was going to dismantle everything I had done.
Right. And this was really the first time any of this had been done in comics, right? Like, who knew what the effect was going to be long term? Was it something that DC really was going to stick with after Crisis came out, or would it all just have been a dream and it all goes back? I mean, this was uncharted territory. So it's kind of interesting to see what people's reactions to it were. But given the parameters of what they were trying to do that Chris was talking about, I guess that, in this first issue, they do make some of those fixes, right? I mean, we lose at least one prominent Earth 3 with the supervillains. And so that's gone. So you could immediately see that it is doing exactly what it set out to do. It's starting to clean up the universe, even though cleaning up sounds like it's a good thing, but obviously the danger that's present is a bad thing, is the way it's presented. So, but the death list. So when they were creating Crisis and figuring out what they were going to do with it, one of the things they were going to do was they were going to get rid of some characters because they were, diluted, in the universe, or just wanted to make an impression that what was going on was so mega and had lasting effects that they were going to take care of killing off some characters, whether they were minor or major, allowing some changes to happen to characters within the series that could end up being reflected in their own books. So they had started to form this death list of who they were going to try and alter or kill throughout the series. So we're going to try and, as we go through the book, keep our own death list. I think, Chris, did you start off with a list for this issue?
I had that unnamed Earth, and I had Earth 3's Crime Syndicate, Ultraman, Power Ring, Johnny Quick, Owlman, and Superwoman, doppelgangers of Superman, Green Lantern, Flash.
Thank God they got rid of those
Batman,
characters because their names
and Wonder
were
Woman.
cool.
Yeah. And of course, Alexander Luthor and Lois Lane Luthor from Earth 3.
So that's our death list so far. I have a feeling it's going to get much bigger.
It was very surgical precision on this one, They just took out that one Earth, but they made sure they took out it all.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So why don't we rate this issue of Crisis now? We talked about the matter and antimatter, good and bad bits that we liked. We've got a rating system that, which one of you came up with?
Dan.
That was a Dan special right there.
Yeah.
Tell us about the rating system, Dan.
Well, the rating system is, if it's basically based on the 4-star system. 1 star would equal that book's going back to the quarter bin. 2 would be, it's going on your pull list. You're gonna you like it, you're gonna see where it's going. Number 3, bag and board. It's good. It's something you want to keep precious to you and be able to still read it, but keep it nice and pristine, keep those corners sharp. And then lastly is the slab. You're gonna send that baby off to CGC so you can just never ever touch it or get your oily fingerprints on it again.
You're cold and unfeeling.
Because you are cold and unfeeling.
Yep,
Yeah.
and
Because you hate comics.
You only care about yourself.
Yes. For the record, I have no books that are slabbed, nor will I ever slab a book. But yeah,
Thanks.
mostly because I just
You
don't
might
have any
slap
that.
one in the ratings.
Mm.
So
Maybe.
lead it off, Dan.
See.
What do you? How do you rate this first issue?
I bagged and boarded this baby. I like it. What can I say? I mean, we've talked at length already about why we like it. It's a damn near perfect introduction issue. Gives you the problem, throws out some peril, some unique and interesting characters and team ups. It's on its way. I like it. I really could not wait to see where issue 2 goes.
Nice.
If I hadn't read this, I would have already snuck ahead a little bit, I think.
Ben?
Yeah, I actually I can't really find a flaw in this issue, and as much as I hate to lead off with a slab, I mean it's perfect.
Oh, Ben's gonna be the guy who likes everything.
Yeah, you know me. That's my
something
MO.
we have never said.
That's my MO. No, I do. I think it's perfect, and I would put not just in the context of the issue itself, but also in the crossover issues that we added to our reading list. There was the crossover issues were a good add-on. Certainly did not become necessary to understanding how important the story was. Obviously, the art is off the wall. Marv Wolfman, again, as I said before, these were giants of the comic world, even in 1985 and 84 when they were writing it, putting it together.
They had the #1 best-selling comic at the time, right? Teen Titans.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that
Yep.
and X-Men.
Well, actually, at the time, Perez has already moved on.
Right. But they had just I think the year before, they had just won awards.
Yeah.
For
the argument here
Eagle
is
Awards.
contract.
And,
yeah. Right.
Yes. Spoiler: one of the books that we read leading up to this was their run of Teen Titans. I don't think anybody in this meeting would disagree. Fantastic work. Absolutely a showcase for both of the artists.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm slabbing this one. I think it's just about the perfect comic. Absolutely makes you want to read issue 2. I'm hooked.
I would say that I would bag and board it. I'm not a big, I really want to reserve that slabbing for something that really had the most effect on me. But I definitely would bag and board this issue. In fact, I'd probably buy a couple and bag and board both of them.
Speculators is not an actual ranking, and I'd like to point out.
But interesting thing about the issue itself is that when this first issue was printed, it was printed on a new comic printing system that they had just started using, and it came out significantly not how Perez wanted it to look. The colors were bright, but the blacks were not, and it didn't come out very well at all. And I kind of slightly remember that. I would have to take out my actual first issue and read it to kind of, and I've been wanting to do that to compare it to the reprinted versions in a lot of the collections, because the collections reprint really nicely. But I gotta imagine that if I was judging it just on the printing quality alone, reading that first issue, maybe I wouldn't bag and board it. Maybe I put it on my pull list. But I think as a story and as reading it through everything, like in the collections and stuff, like we discussed, like both Ben and Dan said, it's just such a great issue and just brings you right in. And you don't need to read anything else. You don't need to have a PhD in DC multiverse. Just it brings it all to you. It makes you want to read more. Chris?
Yeah, bag and board it, definitely. Perez, he's my favorite superhero artist. He elevates any comic for me, and you've got the stakes set out right from the page 2, is it? After we see the birth of the multiverse. Wolfman's writing is as good as it's ever been on this. Like, just the way he entered, you know, all these characters, but it doesn't feel weighted down or sluggish. There's some good little interactions. There's a battle at the end, and then you get the reveal of the monitor, and he says, yeah, all your universes are gonna die. And then you're like, what? I gotta wait a month for this next one? Thanks.
No.
Yeah, this was great. I loved it.
Yeah, he really doesn't. He doesn't have a lot of extraneous, writing in the issue. I don't think there's anything that I would just take out just for the sake of clearing a panel. It's all great. It's all informative and serves the story, keeps you flowing. Yeah, definitely. Again, the interesting thing about this series was that it had all these crossovers into other comics, but pretty much the first 6 issues, which came out January through June of 1985, they were the only Crisis books on the stands. None of the crossovers really started coming out till, actually maybe one came out, a couple came out in June maybe, and then most of them started coming out in July, even though the time stamp on those stories coincides with the earlier issues of Crisis, like number 1 and number 2, etc. So we had, come up with our sort of reading order week to week and how those crossovers, based on notes that, other people at DC and editorial had made about where they kind of go. So we could figure out which ones would be best read with which issues. So we had, I think, what was it, eight books, 7 which were official Crisis crossovers with a banner right over the top of the front cover, and then one of the issues was counted as a Crisis crossover, but was not bannered. It was just it had the infamous red skies mentioned in the comic. So it sort of takes place then. So what we read All-Star Squadron 50, 51, and 52, because even though they came out in subsequent months from each other, they all sort of compact and happen within the time of Crisis 1. Fury of Firestorm, an issue of Infinity Incorporated, the Detective Comics, which was not the official Crisis crossover with the banner, an issue of New Teen Titans, and an issue of Green Lantern. And like I said, a lot of these came out in July, August, months after where they would take place in the story. But we are, again, reading them, in continuity as best as we can. So, Roy Thomas is the writer of All-Star Squadron and Infinity Incorporated. He was utilizing the fact that issue 50 of All-Star Squadron was coming out. It's going to be double-sized. He wanted to definitely tie it into the Crisis, and wanted it to be a big issue. He had a lot of stuff going on with all these Golden Age, Earth 2, World War II era, Justice Society and All-Star Squadron characters. And he really sort of brought in a lot of things that are going on in that issue 50, and then branching out into 51 and 52. What we also see in 50, as well as in the Firestorm, the Infinity Inc., the New Teen Titans, and the Green Lantern, are Harbinger coming and collecting the hero or one of the heroes from each of those books that end up being those heroes and villains that are collected for in issue 1 on the Monitor satellite. So you got to get the backstory on some of these of like, oh, okay, it wasn't just that she popped in, took them, left. There was a little bit more story to that on some of these. Some of them there wasn't. But we're going to talk about each one a little bit, rate them based on our rating system, and whether or not it was a book that after reading it, we would have wanted to continue reading that series, because that was another thing that Crisis and DC was hoping to do, is introduce you to books via crossovers that you would then continue to pick up on a monthly basis. It was a really good deal for anybody that wanted to tie their books in there to hopefully raise sales, right? So I'm bracing myself because I know you guys are not All-Star fans. So
why do you hate us so much that you make us keep reading All-Star comics, man?
I'm going to start off with a glow first. Or I like that the 3 issues of All-Star Squadron 50, 51, and 52, while clearly they're Crisis crossovers where heroes get taken, but it wasn't just that heroes disappear, but I mean, the transporting between Infinite Earths was also integral to all 3 of the storyline. I thought that was done really well by Roy Thomas. All in all, I mean, my expectation level wasn't that high, so he met, but they weren't that bad. I feel like in terms of I probably would pull list this at least while they were Crisis bannered.
If you summarize Roy Thomas comics, I like them. I think he's got good, solid plots with stories that work. It's just
it can be hard.
Oh, his writing destroys me as a human being.
Yeah, it can be hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder if his writing is affected by the fact that he's trying to tackle so much at once. So many characters, so much historical context. I will say that 51 and 52 are not my favorites of his All-Star Squadron issues, but I actually really did like issue 50. There was a lot in there, and it was double sized, so it was double the terror for a couple of you. But I thought his writing actually in that issue was better than the writing in the following issues. And I don't know if
low bar.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But I enjoy it. I love the element that that Ben spoke of about like the fact that they are going to different Earths. There is that dimensional travel happening.
Yeah.
I think that the weakest part of those books is the ongoing Justice Society being rocketed into space plot line, which is what was a historical old All-Star Comics 1940s story that he's trying to place within the context of it all. And I think that's probably my least favorite of any of that element that he's writing about in these. But
an admirable attempt.
I would actually bag and board 50 and I would pull list the other two.
I would have quarter binned all three of these.
All the Thomas.
It means I could just buy them up.
I don't feel like. I think the Infinity Inc. was my least favorite. I think of these.
Yes.
Yeah.
So on that one, we see McFarlane. Is he trying to experiment, or is he just too green?
So it's got.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, it's early, right? I mean, this isn't Amazing Spider-Man McFarlane, let alone, Spider-Man McFarlane. I'm sure he's under some confines, to, I don't know, man. Maybe it's not his shining star work.
So this was issue 18 of Infinity Incorporated. McFarlane started on issue 14. So I actually read, when we were reading as a part of a different reading project, we had read up to All Stars Infinity Incorporated 12. I actually read these issues in between leading up to 18, because 18 is also like in the middle of a 2-3-parter, which it's mostly about, less about Crisis. But his first two issues, his artwork is much better than this issue, and even the issue before it. I almost wonder if, he was trying maybe too hard or something, but the design elements that he definitely has, and the way he's doing storytelling in the first couple issues of the book, not only are much better, but also make Roy Thomas's writing much better. But then you get to this issue and it just is all falling apart. It's not great.
It wasn't good.
I sent you the meme earlier. This issue was the epitome of the Steve Buscemi from 30 Rock, dressed up like a young skateboard punk, saying like, "What's up, my young dudes?"
Yeah.
His attempt at writing angry young people is one of the worst things I've ever read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's definitely trying to keep trends going too. Like like he's watching MTV going, "Oh, I can write that."
Yeah. I almost had to come up with a separate ranking for this entirely, which was just don't take it off the shelf.
Yeah.
Because
it's getting cold in the house, start a fire.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was not
it's okay. Yeah, it's okay if Frederick Wortham wants to ban this one. I'm okay with it.
Oh man.
I'll make the exception.
I thought Detective was great. I don't have a lot of pre-crisis Jason Todd exposure. It was nice to read him as more than just a angry kid, which is really my I guess my picture, my image of him from post-crisis descriptions.
Right.
That issue was great.
This was the one he was writing the letter or diary entry to, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And it was the second of a two-parter involving Mirror Master and Boomerang, Captain Boomerang, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I didn't like the issue. I thought it was I just didn't like the characterization. I thought the plot was not good. But I think it definitely is rooted in this earlier, pre-crisis Batman. I think I'm so used to the Gotham villains. Like if you're not a Gotham villain, you don't go to Gotham and try to take over. Like, you're nuts. Like, don't try to do shit like that. I do
have a tough time with Captain Boomerang in a lot of different cases. Because really, we read Flash. Boomerang he's a bastard. At some point over the summer, I read Suicide Squad run as well, Ostrich's Suicide Squad. I mean, he's a bastard. He's just a
shit.
Yeah. Mirror Master. I'm not even sure which Mirror Master this was in
This is the original.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was no
Scottish brogue.
No Scottish brogue in the writing.
but very loose connection to Crisis. Again, this was just a
Mhm.
Red Skies reference. That was pretty much it.
Yeah, it was about as loose as you can get and still say it's part of Crisis.
Right.
Like,
Well, it was.
if you had just read this issue at random, you would have had no idea this had anything to do with Crisis. I don't think.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
Absolutely true.
Right. But and it wasn't sold as it, it didn't have a banner on it, so it wasn't like, but none of the Batman books that were tie-ins or crossovers had banners. They were just Red Sky references.
Well, thank goodness we have 5 of them to read next week. Then,
Yeah, Christmas.
right? What about Titans?
I'm glad you gave us the up until page 17.
Yeah.
Because then it spoils the shit out of a lot of stuff.
It does.
No,
it does.
Not the best issue of Titans, but I should probably recuse myself because I love Titans.
Yeah, I didn't think it was that great an issue either. Really kind of, elongated that whole cyborg story. Very transitional in a sense,
Oh,
listen, Dick, Sarah's just not that into you.
I know.
I mean,
poor Vic.
after 5 years, like,
True.
I feel bad for him, but not a great issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially, it's 6 or so issues after the whole Terror Trigon storyline, which was phenomenal. And Perez had obviously left and was working on Crisis at that point. But it was, I don't know. It's interesting that Marv Wolfman is writing this. He's like mainlining, being a Crisis crossover, right? So he could do whatever he wants, but he ends up, and this is the reason why we only read to page 17, is because everything after that comes during several issues later of Crisis. But he really compacted all of it to kind of, I guess, give a timeline. So when you do pick it up several months later and read it, it makes sense and doesn't ruin anything. But reading it right away does sort of, you lose some of that surprise.
Of that was October. It came out in July, so we're 7 issues into the Crisis by then.
Right.
Yeah. If I hadn't read the rest of Crisis, I'd be really pissed at you right now. Because I wouldn't have been able to stop at page 17, and then everything would have been ruined. So much would have been ruined for me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one was
last 2.
Yeah, we didn't talk about Firestorm, which
Firestorm, man.
So
Talk
Firestorm,
yeah, that was, I mean, good Psycho Pirate.
Yeah,
it was guy's in pain. Give him a break.
It was the first Firestorm I ever read. When I picked it up,
really well.
A Crisis crossover.
Yeah,
it was interesting, and definitely, they definitely expanded on, the character getting picked up by Harbinger quite a bit, and without even redoing any of the stuff that happened in Crisis #1. Everything leads up to the appearance in Crisis 1. When they go after Killer Frost, right? I mean, there wasn't much, overlay on that.
Right.
No.
Well, the one thing I loved about this issue, because this would have probably been, out of all the issues we read, the one that I would have wanted to have kept reading the most so far, as far as the crossovers. It gives you a really interesting point in Firestorm's life/career, where they're just going off to college. Everyone's changing what they were doing. Introduces you to a bunch of what appeared, because again, I have not read issues 1 through 40 of Fury of Firestorm, really. Yeah. It gives you the hint that there are some characters from his past, but there's new characters as well. Almost like a Saved by the Bell, the college years. There's some old, some new.
Yeah.
Also, great representation. You've got a character in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty impressive.
I was like, holy shit, this happened in the 80s where they included this?
Yeah.
That's a pretty big thing there to have.
Yeah.
in a mainstream comic book. I loved this book. This one would have been one that I would have been like, I need more Firestorm.
I've got to wonder.
Super cool powers and design. I want to see more of this.
I mean, it seems like Conway must have tried to plan for that change of status quo to hit with this crossover. It's just too good a coincidence.
Yeah, I think he actually did. I think I remember reading something somewhere where, that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, that was
Which
smart.
is great. You bring in some new readers. They're not going to be overwhelmed with everything that happened before. Yeah, it is smart. It's interesting, though, that you say this would have been a book that you would have wanted to continue on because the next issue, spoilers, is completely different.
What? You son of a bitch.
It's a Crisis crossover, so we'll read it. But, I mean, it's a completely different book in a sense, which we'll get to later. But
well, that will change my ranking accordingly next week.
It might.
When we get to it.
Might.
Take back seats.
Yeah, I would have made it a pull list book too.
I'm bag and board this.
I'd bag and board this one.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
I pull listed.
Yeah.
I think it was all good, but it didn't grab me like it grabbed Dan.
Yeah.
Some of the dialogue was cheesy. You know, the dialogue, the Saved by the Bell college years dialogue, that was, I could do without that.
I love that. I love those years.
Like, oh, look, the guy from high school followed me to the college. What a coincidence.
Yeah.
Also, nobody realizes that I'm Firestorm.
Not even your girlfriend or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But thank God Professor Stein got a job at the same college that I'm at.
Well, when you've got a brain like Stein, you can pretty much write your own ticket to go wherever you want.
That's what they say.
Probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Green Lantern, our last one.
That was my favorite.
That was damn good.
I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised that I loved it as much as I did. Yeah, that's a bag and board, and I'm definitely picking up the next one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I liked
cool.
it. I would probably, it's a pull list. Not really bag and board. I mean, I thought it was, especially in the context of Crisis, obviously John Stewart gets taken off by Harbinger, but it's an awful lot of Hal Jordan. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
And Guy Gardner.
And Guy Gardner.
Yeah, who
that's what made it a bag and board for me. I don't like Guy Gardner as a character, but I love the fact that those last few pages, you're like, oh shit, they're making him a Green Lantern.
Yeah.
What is about to happen? You know,
there's so much relevance in this issue though, because I mean, like it crosses over pretty well with Crisis. You know, you've got an extended piece with John Stewart and Harbinger. Well, actually, I mean, you don't even get John Stewart and Harbinger in Crisis #1, do you? So this is the only interaction that you get. So you get that whole story. Definitely, it trickles some storyline from previous issues with what was going on with John and Katma, and they've obviously got something going on personally. You've got the Hal Jordan thing and Hal Jordan's cast of supporting characters coming in. Tom, mentions of Carol, and the Guy Gardner piece. I think there was an appearance of him in the issue or issue 2 before this, maybe, but this is really when he starts on his trek to become the Guy Gardner that we all know now. I mean, that didn't exist before that. Like there had been one story where he had appeared ages ago in Green Lantern and he had gotten the ring or something or whatever, just the taste of it. But that was it, I think. So this is really where we get Guy Gardner. Like it's building from here. And that feud with Hal, that also starts here. And as a Green Lantern reader for like years after this, like that feud is infamous, between the two of them. So it's interesting that you've got John Stewart as Green Lantern, but you've got all the other Green Lanterns in the book too, at the same time, even though they don't have a ring. And then, of course, you've got Power Battery and the Guardians and how that leads into the next issue of Crisis. And, there's all sorts of, I think, lots of great stuff in here. I didn't, however, like the cover. I hate this cover.
Not a great cover.
Just didn't like it. Out of all the covers from these issues that we read for crossovers, my two favorite are the Fury of Firestorm cover, which I think, was it Raphael Cayenne? I don't know how to say his last name.
However you say it, yeah.
If I'm not sure if he's credited as doing the cover. I think he is, but the cover was excellent. I also like his art in that issue, but I also really like All-Star Squadron 50's cover as well. It's just got that sort of like, boom, I'm a Crisis crossover. You need to buy me. I'm double sized. I think it's exciting. And Jerry Ordway. It's a Jerry Ordway cover.
Yeah. It's hard to go wrong with Ordway.
Right.
Very hard.
So I definitely put the Green Lantern on my pull list. In fact, I think this is when I started actually really reading Green Lantern, was with this, because I ended up buying Green Lantern for years after this.
Well, it does a good job if you're not familiar. If you only really know John Stewart from that one little appearance in Crisis, it gives you a ton of information to play with.
Yeah.
I mean, so that you at least have a good grip on who he is. As you learn that he's not been a Lantern for very long. He's dating another Green Lantern. You learn that Hal was a Green Lantern, that another guy wants to be a Green Lantern.
And the Guardians.
Yeah, and the Guardians, yeah. Gives you a lot of information. It's the perfect crossover book. If you only know this character from what you saw in the main title, this fills in a lot of the blanks for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also propels you into whatever's happening with Green Lantern, which several of them end up being Crisis crossovers, but some of them aren't necessarily Crisis crossovers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good catch, catches you.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a pull list book. So next week we talk about 3 issues of Crisis.
Yeah.
We've got some crossovers, not a lot of crossovers. There's some Batman and Detective, which at that point in time, all of Batman Detective was working as a bi-weekly ongoing story with 2 different artists, Tom Mandrake and Gene Colan, with Doug Munch writing the book. But all those are just Red Sky references, not a huge tie-in to Crisis, except for a reference in the last issue that brings Batman to where he is in Crisis number 2. Then we got Crisis 3, a couple of crossovers, a Crisis 4. But those 2, 3, 4 are pretty tight-knit sort of storyline, really propels you into what's going on now that we've set it up. But I'm excited to talk about those because there's a lot that's going to happen.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot of information to get through.
We can do it.
Yeah, we're not prone to veering off topic at all. So yeah,
we did pretty good.